Here's a fact that sounds impossible until you sit with it. Some of the deadliest disasters of the Middle Ages didn't arrive with fire, swords or plague, but silently, overnight, on frozen winds that turned rivers into roads and bread into stone, and the mystery is why we barely remember them. These winters so brutal, they erased villages, collapsed kingdoms, and rewrote lives without leaving the kind of scars history likes to memorialize. Imagine waking to a world where the sun rises but offers no warmth, where livestock are frozen, standing upright, where bells crack in church towers from the cold, and people vanish not in battles, but between one snowfall and the next. And as we step into these forgotten winter disasters, we uncover a hidden force of medieval history, one that shaped survival, migration, faith, and fear in ways that still echo today, even if the names of those winters have faded from memory. To understand these disasters, you have to understand how fragile medieval life really was, because the Middle Ages existed on a razor's edge, food stored just barely long enough, transport dependent on passable roads, communities isolated by geography and season. And when winters turned unusually harsh, longer freezes, deeper snow, relentless storms, it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was catastrophic. Imagine the great freezes when rivers like the Thames or Rhine locked solid for months, stopping trade entirely, or winters that followed poor harvests, where grain froze in storage and seed grain died before spring planting. And these weren't rare flukes, they came in waves, especially as Europe slid toward the colder climate of the later medieval period, and chroniclers wrote about them in hushed tones, describing hunger so severe people ate bark, boiled leather, or abandoned children. Yet these events often slip between wars and royal successions in our histories, treated as background noise rather than the main story. Even though, for ordinary people, winter was the enemy they feared most. Now, here's where the overlooked knowledge emerges, because winter disasters weren't just about cold, they were about systems failing step by step. First, transportation collapsed as roads disappeared under snow and ice, then markets failed because goods couldn't move. Then prices spiked beyond reach. And finally, disease followed hunger. Because weakened bodies couldn't fight infections, it's a cascade, and medieval communities tried desperately to adapt, digging snow tunnels between homes, rationing firewood, slaughtering animals early to preserve meat, even altering church calendars to pray for early thaws. And some monasteries and towns survived better than others because they had learned, painfully, to store surplus, diversify crops, or use communal granaries. And the tragedy is that these survival strategies were local, fragile, and easily lost when a generation passed without extreme winters, meaning each disaster forced people to relearn lessons their ancestors already knew, often too late. And this is where these forgotten winters suddenly feel uncomfortably relevant. Because modern society, despite all its technology, still relies on complex systems that can fail in similar chains, just faster. Think about how a single extreme winter today can shut down power grids, freeze supply lines, and isolate cities. And the medieval experience teaches us that resilience isn't just about strength. It's about redundancy. Local resources, community planning, and respecting seasonal limits. Imagine applying those lessons now, building food reserves that don't depend on constant transport, designing infrastructure that assumes failure, not perfection, and relearning the idea that winter is a force to prepare for months or years in advance. Not something you react to once the snow starts falling. And maybe the reason these disasters were forgotten is that remembering them is uncomfortable, because they remind us how thin the line between stability and collapse really is. So, the forgotten winter disasters of the Middle Ages weren't just historical footnotes. They were defining moments that tested human endurance without spectacle or glory. Moments when survival depended on foresight, cooperation, and hard-earned wisdom rather than heroics. And as climate uncertainty returns and extreme weather grows more common, these silent catastrophes deserve to be remembered, not as warnings carved in stone, but as stories whispered through snow and ice, reminding us that nature doesn't need to attack us to defeat us. It only needs us to forget how to live within its limits. And if this journey into winter's hidden history changed how you see the cold months ahead, consider sharing it, subscribing, or continuing to explore the past. Because history's quietest disasters often have the loudest lessons for the future.